Very good. Thank you. Sorry for the technical troubles, and welcome everybody. This is SIG API Machinery in the Kubernetes open source community bi-weekly meeting. Today is December 11th, 2024. I think this is likely our last meeting of the year, believe it or not, because the next occurrence will be during the holidays probably. So we'll see. But anyway, thank you for coming. And we have a packed agenda. So I want to get started as soon as possible so we can address as much as we can. With that said, why don't we go in order? So do we have Bryce or somebody to represent the first point?
Yep, I'm here.
Hi,
So
Bryce. Welcome.
for some background, I met up with a few folks at KubeCon NA24, and we got to talking about some CRD linting and upgrade validation work that might be reasonable to propose to be in the purview of this SIG. I started up a thread a couple weeks ago, and it sounds like this SIG is the right place to kind of have this conversation. For a little bit of background, I was working on a new version of the Operator Lifecycle Manager project, and in there, we're doing validations against CRDs, specifically whenever we're doing upgrades to make sure that we're not like invalidating anything in etcd or anything like that when we upgrade a CRD on the cluster. They're best effort checks, but I recently spun those out into a little CLI tool that can be used in like a GitHub action and whatnot. I'm also aware that OpenShift has the CRD schema checker. And I met up with Joel Speed, and he expressed interest in merging some of the efforts that we were doing with OLM and the CRD schema checker in OpenShift. And so just kind of wanted to get some thoughts on tooling in this space for being part of a SIG project or something like that. And in the thread, David mentioned that we should discuss advantages, disadvantages to the different inspection points, if there's space for more than a single solution, things like that. Yep, just kind of trying to get some general thoughts and try to figure out what if there are next steps and what those next steps might be.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it here. So this came up about a year ago as well, when the CRD schema checker started maybe 6 months before that. And there were questions at the time, can we make a SIG project out of it? But we were still really exploring it to try to figure out what was here. And since then, I think we've discovered several things. I guess I'll try to summarize it here. We've discovered that there is definitely a need for a tool that can compare CRD schemas. So you have a CRD YAML and you want to compare old and new. There's definitely a need for that. That is the case that we find ourselves in anytime we are consuming a CRD that you don't author, right? And you want to know, am I going to have problems? So we need something that does that. Having that tool available at admission time um, has some nice capabilities to it, right? Like it gives you a way to know, hey, I have a problem at the time at which you're actually putting it on a cluster. That's nice. Being able to run that tool at build time is also really useful because it lets you say, I'm not going to make this mistake for each iteration of a thing that I have. But it doesn't actually match what the users have, right? Remember, you evolve your code one step at a time, and a user might take two versions at once or something equally wild. There are still gaps that I don't believe that we can do using only the CRD schema. So the CRD schema is useful for the people consuming it, for the people and for the people writing it. But there's still a gap where you can't do things like Joel made some ludicrously large PR recently, standardizing the use of tags. And those tags don't exist in the CRD schema. Um, and yes, Joel did make it here. Um, so it was a very reasonable but very large PR. So I think that there is a necessity for more than one tool. I think that they will serve different needs. I think that now that we know that, and we know that at least part of the shape can be shared between admission and a CLI tool, and that there may be additional CLI checks that we need, we can consider the shape of the projects we want to create. That was a lot. So in terms of background, does that help where we were, the decisions we made then, and where we are now?
Yep, I think that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that like I do in that CRD diff tool pull some like import some of the manifest tooling from CRD schema checker to break down the CRD manifests. But besides that, I wasn't sure because OLM was an upstream project and we were originally contributing that logic even further upstream into a separate project that we weren't sure their appetite for using the OpenShift stuff. So that's why it ended up being spun out for our needs into something else. But I do think that it makes sense to potentially reconsider consider the checks that we have in that CRD diff tool, what's in CRD schema checker, find what's different, what's common, and create like potentially a new project or something like that under SIG API Machinery that can be like the area where we concentrate the efforts on all of that for the CRD YAML specific kind of tool.
I think I'm definitely open to that. I'm actually open to moving the repo. If Joe wanted to look through and also make his assessment about whether it was a good starting point, I would be open to moving the repo from OpenShift to Kubernetes SIGs. I think that we do need to take the time to write up a KEP. I don't believe it would be bound by KEP freeze rules, but I think we need to write up a KEP that explains the reason for all this to the people that haven't lived the past 3 years. Who are going to come later and look and say, like, why does this tool exist? Why is it here? Why is it focused on both admission and CLI? I think answering those questions um, is a prereq, but once it was met, I'd be happy to move it at this point. Joe, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I'm really supportive of this. I have looked at the CRD schema checker. I like the overall design. I think mostly it's just a matter of figuring out the details, making sure that we communicate like what our goals are really clearly. What I'm really interested in, like who and what we're trying to support, because I think that kind of drives some of the decisions. But there are people within Google that have expressed interest in contributing to something like this in the past. So I think we could help maybe tease out some contributors to help work on this, grow the linter set or whatever is appropriate.
Yeah. So Bryce, if you wanted to go and try to write that doc up, I would say I'd also want to get, if we could, another maintainer, at least on the path. I know that James Munley had expressed an interest in the past. And if you were to write it up and undertake the effort to describe what the goals are, that might help sort of initialize him as well.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds good. I'd be happy to take that as an action item to write up the KEP.
Some visibility into, like, I know the Helm community has had a lot of interest in having something like this to help them out in like shift left checking and things. So getting some of the data from a major ecosystem tool like that, or other tools that you think are important, and making sure that we have some feedback on their use cases and what they would think would be needed for it to be useful to them, I think would help motivate it and guide it in a reasonable direction. I can help with that too.
That makes sense. And some of the use cases of why that CRD diff tool that I wrote up exists is some of the gaps that we noticed in the ecosystem for OLM. And
That's great.
So there's like a bunch of, once we implemented the diff checks in our pre-flight checks, we noticed that, so we added a knob for you to disable them. We noticed that upgrading through the catalogs and stuff that are available in OLM results in having to disable that knob quite a bit, because there's a lot of minor breaking changes that kind of seem to happen, either that are definitely breaking changes or ones that we don't have accounted for in our pre-flight checks yet, that results in having tooling like this earlier on, like you're saying, shift left into something like CI or something like that would have made it easier to build those future versions without those breaking changes. So that was kind of the way that the CRD diff tool is set up, is specifically such that you can also use it in CI and locally to do like comparisons between Git revisions and things like that as well.
Yeah, that sounds like a really great use case. I think getting one or ideally two more major use cases would really turn this into a community project where you're having to weigh what you want for that project versus what other projects need, and that kind of turns it into a community tool at kind of a deeper level. So I'd be very interested in that. But I think that's a really good use case.
Okay. Sounds like, Joel, your next topics are connected to this somehow. Is this a good transition?
Yeah. So I'm part of OpenShift, and I'm involved in quite a lot of the API review there. And obviously, Schema Check is something I've been contributing to and helping with. But as David said, there are things it can't catch. A lot of the API conventions document, if you look at it, talks about different things like serialization or built-in Go types that we're not allowed to use, things that really can only be looked at from the Go struct. So I was talking to quite a few different people at KubeCon, and we kind of all had come to the conclusion that we needed an API conventions linter. I ended up starting to hack on this. So I've posted something, and there's a handful of kind of rules that I've got in there. I created a doc, which is kind of like hopefully people have access to comment on that. A place to kind of start some discussion about what we might want from something like this within the community. So the kind of wish list that I put together there is basically from my experience reviewing API PRs, which primarily is CRDs rather than built-in types. But then also going through the API conventions and finding rules that I thought, yeah, that's something we can turn into a linter. So my plan at the moment is to kind of iterate through these and start kind of enforcing it. But what I'd like to see over time is this become not only a linter for upstream, but also for CRD types as well, because I think there's a lot of people out there who struggle with remembering all of the different rules and implementing the mechanics. And if we can make it enforceable both for built-ins and CRDs, that might make a lot of people's lives easier and hopefully avoid kind of serialization issues and whatnot down the line for people. So yeah, I think the ask today is like if anyone has a moment to kind of go through that, suggest new ideas for rules they'd like to see, or comment on some of the ones that I've picked up, that would be helpful. And if you want to have a go at it, I put some notes in the README on the repo as well, where I've been hacking on this. But yeah, it kind of is working. I've put it onto the OpenShift API repo, going to continue developing it there and see how we get on. And then, yeah, eventually I can kind of see this potentially like the schema checker becoming an upstream project. So what I'd like for it is not just for me to maintain it. So working out the path for that as well would be good.
I'm also really interested in this one. I see them as kind of like two very complementary things, but tackling very clearly distinct use cases. There's been some work with Tim Hawken and Aaron Prindle and Jan Rhee and myself on this idea of a validation gen tool where it's a prototype, the idea is that we might start tagging the types.go files in tree in Kubernetes with a lot more declarative validation information. And the moment we do that, we're very interested in starting to lint that for the benefit of people adding APIs, people reviewing APIs. If we have two versions of the same type, maybe even linting those against each other. So I'm very interested in this. I could probably find one of the people working on that project to hop on this if we want to start building a community there.
Yeah, and any feedback on it, obviously is going to be useful. As say, like trying to make it like the default case I'm aiming at is kind of with built-ins in mind, and so there's a few notes I've made in that Google Doc of like, okay,
Right.
so this rule talks about things like having bounds on numeric fields. I know how I would check that on a CRD because you have max value or whatever it is. I don't know exactly how that works on built-ins or if that's even annotated at all on the built-ins at the moment at the type level. So having something like those markers you're talking about in your POC would make something like this a lot easier to write and then start enforcing those kinds of things automatically.
Yeah, I think they're kind of complementary. Like basically, we're going to be producing more tags, which makes the tool that processes the tags more valuable. Yeah, this is great. I think yeah, I'll try and identify somebody on that group that might be interested in giving this a first pass and just giving feedback. But I'm very interested in this. I'm very interested in getting to the hands of API reviewers too.
Yeah, definitely. I do wonder if the KEP that we were talking about on the previous topic, whether that should be a generic, tooling to help CRD lifecycling, or whether it should kind of be specific to the schema checker. Because as you say, like these are all complementary things. Perhaps we want to just focus on the use case of kind of improving the API review experience / CRD experience in one go.
What we've seen in that project so far is that a lot of the details of the built-in validation is pretty distinct from what happens in CRDs. Ideally, we want those two things to start to converge instead of continuing to diverge. But I do think it's a lot of the real problems you're going to hit in tree have a lot to do with like making sure you cover all these cases that reviewers check for, making sure that like an associative list has its key tags set up so server-side apply works right and all these things. I guess some of that does apply to CRDs too, but I think there'll be some overlap, but I think there'll be a lot of specialized work, at least in the short term. But keeping them thematically aligned seems important. Not sure what the best mechanism to do that right now is.
Short of being involved in both projects.
Yeah, I think that's the only way, right? You just have people that are tracking both and involved in both. But I don't know if we would like necessarily have like an entire overlap, like it's the same team or same exact group of people working on both. I'm not sure yet. I'm kind of willing to let it be a little looser. I'm curious what other people think on that though.
I mean, I think I do see a need for the separate tools. I think when we read it up, it'll become more clear, Joel. But I think they're satisfying two different needs. They're built on two different technologies.
Yeah, that's kind of fair. I'll try and coordinate with Bryce about the first part then and see where we go from there. So I think this linter thing is much more in its infancy, so it still needs some fleshing out and kind of a lot.
So in my mind, that just means that I wouldn't combine them in terms of like, hey, we're gonna have one repo to rule them all sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think I could see having an appetite for two different projects because I think they will do two different things that neither can do what the other one does.
It sounds kind of like it does maybe make sense to have at least on the KEP side, we could maybe have a delineation between KEP for tooling for like the CRD space, and potentially have. I'm not super familiar with the KEP process, so but I do think I recall that there's like
it's just a convenient placeholder for us to record a long-term decision. It's not going to be a thing where we have like this is the GA criteria for it because it's going to be a SIGs project. I just want to have an organized spot for the people that come next to say, why did they make this decision?
Gotcha.
Yeah, I guess my question about the KEP was because they are obviously closely aligned, and if you start writing about okay, we're going to do these like YAML-based CRD schema checks, someone's going to ask, okay, well, what about validating the Go types?
So I guess I don't mind having it in the same cap describing both. I'm just saying I don't see a reason to combine the projects because I think the
Oh,
two
yeah.
projects are at least what I initially looked at is delineated as so different that combining them would just be like having catfish pizza, which sounds amazing, but I don't think many people would eat a catfish pizza.
Yeah, no, I'm on the same page there. It was more just about the documentation and discoverability of these toolings. Like they're probably going to go hand in hand. So if the documentation is on the KEP side, the decision side is there and references both, that might be an easier kind of doc to read. But yeah, this feels like it's a long way down the path anyway.
Okay. I don't know if there is any other opinion on this topic before we move to the next one. Everybody feel free to raise your voice. Otherwise, it's always David and Joe. I think, Joel, you have also the next item. You want to get into that one?
Yeah, so I was trying out the new cell format library recently, and the example doesn't work. So I don't know if that's going to link to my comment because I think it was resolved. Oh, it did work. So the message expression specifically is the part that doesn't work here. So when you do this format validate value, it returns a slice. Now, when the cell cost estimation is looking at this slice, it doesn't actually know what the maximum length of that slice might be. So it does a worst case estimate. And that means that there is no way you can get anywhere near being under your cost budget for this message expression. So what I was trying to work out, and I couldn't see anything in the code, is if there's a way that that join can somehow or the value even can kind of express, I know I'll have at most 5 values, so that the cost checker doesn't just go wild. Because yeah, at the moment, you can't do that join in that example on line 40.
This looks like an embarrassing cell bug, probably in the cost code. I'm sorry, I hadn't actually seen this before we opened the notes today. Let's open a separate issue for this and CC Huang and myself, and let's dig in and see if we can't just fix it. As part of that issue, I might see if we can come up with any short-term workarounds or whatever, but this looks like a pretty clear bug to me at first glance.
Cool, I can raise an issue.
Yeah, that shouldn't happen. I can't see any nice way to work around that. Thanks for finding that. Sorry, I didn't see it here.
No worries.
Okay. So from the notes, I think, Joe, your next item was more related to the previous points and not to the last one, or I am getting this wrong?
Yeah, further up. Yeah, we got that covered. I just wanted to leave a link there for people.
Okay, great. Let's go to Adrian. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Okay, question to you. Am I supposed, or are you the correct group to ask for advice about updating documentation? I wish to inform any potential, let's say, users or researchers about the incompleteness of Kubernetes schemas. I mean, the point that we check more things in the code base that are described in the Open API. Because many people are starting the projects basing on these Swagger files or OpenAPI.json files. So this is my question to you, and if I can share the screen for a second, I will be glad.
Let me see. Let me make you. I need to make you co-host. Let's see if with that you can present. Can you try?
Okay. This is yes. Sure. Thank you.
I will stop presenting myself so you can.
Thank you.
How do I stop presenting?
Where's this? This one? Kubernetes API. Yes. Okay. So.
Yes, we can see your screen.
So great. So this is my question to you. If you would be open for something like this, this is the current documentation page, and my idea was to add simple warning because I still spot many people that are trying to use the resource definitions from put in the swagger.json or openapi.json, and I know that we have many more validation roles, especially in the Kube API server. So, and I didn't find already a place in the Kubernetes documentation where it is directly described that, you know, guys, please don't use this or don't trust this. Yeah. So if you could advise if I can contribute like this, or maybe it's not a correct place, or how open you are for this kind of contribution. I just wish, you know, to save just future researchers' times, because I wasn't the first and I'm not the last person who tried it this way. And if you
I'm
need
definitely
some
open
explanation,
to it. I don't actually
it
know
was
where in the code
the
it
example.
is, but if you have already found it and want to open the PR, then that seems fine to me. I don't know that I would say swagger.json. I'd probably say the open API definition is incomplete.
Okay.
Joe, are you also okay with it? I mean, it seems straightforward.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Just the way to work, if you open the PR, then you go to the API Machinery channel and, you know, tag myself is fine. Just directly mention me. I'll go have a look at the PR. It will eventually have to go through the docs team. They might have preferences on like what the actual shape of the warning is. But I'm happy to give it a technical LGTM for you.
Okay. Thank you so much for the clarification, and I'm leaving the screen for you.
Thank you, Adrian, for coming and trying to make our documentation better, and you know, for future people, as you said. So thank you for that. Let me find my screen again. 1 second. Okay. So that one was this one, and then do we have Eric? Are you on the call?
Yeah, I'm here. Nice to see you. It's my first time here. Do you hear me?
Welcome. Yes, we can hear you. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. I work on a lot of operators where we use controller runtime and also the QBuilder and QBuilder patterns. And this is a quite old issue around how to get first-class support for server-side apply in controller runtime. I love to use the controller runtime client when I write controllers. And there's also some useful helpers in controller runtime that we tend to use. But now we all want to use server-side apply, and it seems to me like this issue is blocking better support for server-side apply in controller runtime. So I'm more here to ask how should I proceed in this, and if someone here would be able to support me or mentor me in trying to make this happen.
I don't know how to do it, but I do know the guy that originally made the apply configurations.
Oh, that's me. I mean, Go is duck typed, so what you really want is some kind of something to latch onto as an indicator that this is and apply configuration interface implementation, right?
I put some more comments on the agenda. After the pull request was submitted to extend the code generation, we got a new function called getName returning a string pointer. I had a discussion with Alvaro Ailman, which is a controller runtime maintainer. And he said that this could be used as a start to actually make them identifiable as apply configurations. But as described in the issue, we should probably see if we should add more functions to that interface. And there's also a discussion about a generic client in this area.
Yeah, I mean, is there a reason that the consumer, that interface, needs to know about certain common functions? When I think about this from like a Go interface perspective, I usually think, what is the consumer of the interface getting out of the interface? This is very distinct from like Java interfaces, which are a distinct type to latch onto, whereas getName doesn't really necessarily guarantee you anything, right? It's like anybody could choose to implement that. It could accidentally be implemented very easily by many other things. Adding more interfaces reduces that odds, but it seems only valuable if your consumer is getting something out of it, versus just like saying, I don't know, it can be anything, and you just make it a generic.
Yeah. Right now, the controller runtime client, you probably know it. It's built around the meta object and runtime object interfaces. So at least as a user of the controller runtime client, you won't make obvious mistakes supplying the wrong thing into the functions that controller runtime provide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see some value to that. Whatever interface we're going to add, it's going to have to be super stable. Probably not going to want to change it once you agree on what it is, because then you could break any call sites. I don't know. Is there something very like clearly associated with? I could help you think this through. I'm trying to think of something that like either attaches it to the actual client Go type that it's associated with, or something that very clearly marks it as being an apply configuration. Even if we generated like a really clear SIGL function that's like is apply configuration always returns true or something, then at least like it's very unambiguous. I don't have a lot of great ideas because I haven't seen this pattern used a lot, where you're trying to like just make an interface to be a type marker. Does anybody have any thoughts on where that's been successful in the past? Has anybody seen other cases like that?
No.
I'll take this chance since I wasn't super closely following the earlier parts of this conversation. But Joe, in Go, you can emulate the same kind of interfaces you have in Java just by making the interface private. And then the only thing that can implement the interface is a struct that's defined in the same package. And then you can make a dummy struct that you have to embed into any other caller that you want to implement that interface. So you will always have a guaranteed compile time marker that prevents anything else from ever assuming that interface.
I could do it.
And that's how I've seen people use it. It's rare in the Go ecosystem, but it's not like unheard of. Like I think a lot of the gRPC libraries for Go use it as a way of giving implementers of the gRPC interface, either the server or the client, I forget, where you can decide when you're constructing your implementation, do you want a compile time failure if you upgrade your dependencies and the interface changes in some way, like for example, to add a new method. And you get to decide, do you want it to be a compile time failure that you have to address at the moment you upgrade the library, or do you want the dependency upgrade to transparently just start returning non-implemented for those RPC calls? That's basically how like gRPC uses it.
Cool. Thanks, Mo. Yeah, I like this better than like just trying to like latch onto some functions that are there. This seems pretty clear, right? Like it's going to be the decision of is this an applied configuration type? It's going to be clear yes, no, based on that.
Yeah.
Cool.
It would be super useful if it was connected to the type in client Go also somehow, if that's possible.
I mean, we can change the generator to add something really simple. We should just go do that. If you need to work with somebody to do that, either Stefan Kit or myself could potentially help you with that. But it's that's going to be relatively clear and straightforward. I think maybe just following up on Slack, saying like, based on the conversation we had with Mo, here's an idea of how to do it. We think is pretty clean. Everybody okay with that? Somebody can just open a PR to add the code gen, which should just be like 4 or 5 lines of code plus the generated code. And we could push it out.
So what are, if any, the next steps here for Eric?
I would just really quickly review what Mo had suggested and make sure you get a concrete example in the details somewhere, and then either post on Slack or open an issue, whatever you prefer. And then if you're comfortable doing the code changes, really not hard. Somebody could guide you on that, or if that's it feels out of scope for you, let us know and we can see if we can find somebody to help with that. But yeah, I would just maybe an issue. Issue would be super clear.
Yeah, at least we can start there. I have looked at some of the generation code, and it has become a lot simpler after Tim did the refactoring there.
Yeah, and this is mostly going to be static, so you can mostly just like write the code in a Golang string somewhere that emits this very, very clear thing. Yeah.
Thanks.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, Adrian and Eric, for coming to the meeting. I hope it was useful for you as first-time comers. That brings us to the end of the agenda. I forgot to add, it's been a couple of meetings we canceled. Some of us were in KubeCon North America, in Salt Lake City, Utah. It was fun. Joe and David did a very interesting talk. I will put it on the notes here. The link, I think, is public already. So wanted to mention that. Yeah, and with that, unless there is anything else anybody wants to bring up, we can close this meeting. As I said, likely next one is going to be in 2025. But you know, Slack is always there, and if you need anything ad hoc, you can ping us. Anything else, David, Joe?
No, I think that's it. It's it for the year, right? We're not going to meet until January.
Yeah.
Great.
Unless you want to meet on Christmas Eve or something like that.
I'll call you just to wish you Merry Christmas.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, good to see y'all. See y'all next year.
Take care.
Okay, very good. Take care. Thank you for coming. Have a good Wednesday.